Hello interwebs, Star Trek Picard is coming in pretty much about a week. I am so dang excited for it. I mean, I'm so excited I pulled out my first Contact Picard action figure just to be like, yes, look at me, engage, assimilate this. But with Star Trek Picard so close, I figured that this was the right time to give a sort of post-mortem on the short treks. Because when Star Trek Picard starts, no one's really going to be wanting to talk about the short treks. Which is kind of sad, because I think short treks have been some of the most intriguing additions to the Star Trek universe. Now, I don't think that they've been perfect, but I do think that they've done some intriguing stuff with the short treks. And there's hair in my mouth. So I think it would be fun to just go through and rank every single one of the short treks, including the season 1 of short treks that came out between Discovery season 1 and season 2, and just sort of give a quick dissection and analysis of them and talk quickly about where I think they failed and where they succeeded. Now, before I get into the ranking, I should say I do like all of the short treks, or at least am ambivalent towards some of them. There's none that I out and out hated. There are some that I think work much better than the others, but even the ones at the bottom of my list are ones that I, at least in some way, shape, or form, found something to enjoy about them, even if there were parts of it that I didn't like overall. So with that being said, let's start right at the bottom of my list, and that is the first ever short trek, Runaway. Now, there is a lot to like about Runaway. First off, I really like Tilly and Poe's relationship here, and I do like the interaction that those two characters had. For example, when Poe first reveals herself and Tilly's asking about ice cream and trying to learn how to talk to Poe, and I really like that we came back to Poe and Tilly's relationship later on in Discovery Season 2. I think those two characters have a lot of chemistry together, and I was honestly kind of disappointed that Poe actually didn't go with the Discovery into the future at the end of Season 2, because I really would have liked to see Poe continue to have a relationship with Tilly and really build out that relationship. So I'm kind of sad that we are probably not going to get much more Poe moving forward. And that kind of gets into one of my main problems with the short as a whole, because while it is telling a self-contained story in and of itself, it does really feel, especially in retrospect, set up for Season 2 of Discovery, and not really doing anything on its own. Looking back at this episode, it's clear to see that Runaway is trying to set up oh, we need this dilithium thing for later on in Season 2, so we're going to have, introduce it here as a concept so that people don't worry about us lampshading it later on in Discovery Season 2. And it really just kind of makes it feel a little bit weird in Season 2 when Poe just randomly shows up and is just this character who has a plot device that the characters need. And so it just feels like this episode is just sort of retroactively trying to fix that. And it doesn't really work. Now, I don't know the intentions, whether this came first or after Season 2 of Discovery, if they said, well, let's use Poe again from the short trek. But it really just doesn't kind of work in hindsight. And also there's, kind of some plot problems with this as well. Why did no one worry about, Tilly destroying the mess hall, or how they actually got Poe off of the ship without anybody noticing in the transporter room, things like that. And that kind of comes up in every short trek and every Star Trek in general. There are always some sort of plot holes. But here, it just kind of got to me, mostly because I didn't really enjoy the short trek as a whole. Alright, next up on my list is Girl Who Made the Stars. This is one that I honestly don't hate all that much, but I kind of am just yeah, it was a thing that happened. There's nothing really in this short trek that really I latched onto and really kind of enjoyed. I think the thing that's most memorable to me, honestly, is the fact that Michael Burnham has a plushie tardigrade that I really want, and I'm really kind of surprised Star Trek has not, actually started selling on their store yet. Come on, you have it right there. It's a literal tardigrade plushie. Just sell me that. I want to buy 5,000 of them. This story is nice, and it's nice to get a fable story. It was nice to get a story that was steeped in African lore, and that's something that we don't normally see in Star Trek, a whole episode based around another culture that isn't American culture, coming in and looking at another culture. I mean, we sometimes get Native American culture and different things, but it's usually with ooh, look, we're American kind of culture, Federation culture, looking at another culture and kind of judging it or learning about it. Whereas here, this really felt like it was coming out of African lore and culture in and of itself, and it was kind of nice to see that in Star Trek. Well, I do think there is a place for a lot of diversity in Star Trek and doing more things than just showing hey, let's do another Starfleet thing. And I kind of liked there being a kid's story in the Trek-verse. I don't know, this story just felt a little bit weird and strange and not necessarily what Star Trek is best utilized for. So it's not bad by any means, but it's just kind of there. But I do like the message of like, oh, aliens kind of brought us the stars and teaching about like learning to not be afraid and overcome your fear, and the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, that kind of message in this story. And that's all kind of nice, but otherwise this short trek just kind of feels there. There's nothing really for me to latch onto as I really loving it. Speaking of short treks that aren't really memorable, next up on my list is Ask Not. This was another one that was kind of like, yeah, I liked it. There's not much to hate here, but I didn't really enjoy it all that much just because there's nothing really special about it. Yeah, there were some fun bits with like the twist being like, oh, Pike may be the bad guy here, and that this was all a test at the end. But for me personally, I kind of saw all of that coming. I kind of knew that that was going to be the twist, that this was the thing that was going to be like revealed at the end. And so it kind of made the rest of it kind of feel a little bit short shrifted. And so they just kind of like felt like they were just going through the beats to get there. Now there were some interesting parts where I really liked the back and forth between Pike and the crew member, and just seeing all the different tactics that Pike used to try and trick her, to try and convince her to let him go. There was some fun interplay between these characters. But again, the fact that I kind of called it within like a minute of the episode kind of just made it lackluster for me. Now, the reason this goes higher than The Girl Who Made the Stars, however, is because Anson Mount's Pike. I mean, I can never say no to more Pike. And really, that's what elevates it for me, is like, I just want more Anson Mount's Pike. I want a Pike TV show. So any like little crumbs that the Star Trek universe will give me of Anson Mount, like, here, take your Anson Mount. Here, the plebeians shall feed on this. Give me more Anson Mount Pike. Just give it to me. I just want it so bad. So that's what kind of elevates this a little bit more. But beyond Pike being there, it really doesn't stand out as anything super special for me. The next one on my list is The Trouble with Edward. And I have to say, I actually really like The Trouble with Edward quite a bit, but there's one thing that holds me back from really loving it, and I'll get to that in a second. But to focus on the good here, I think the humor is really funny. I think both actors, why am I blanking on his name? Bob's Burgers guy, for some reason I'm blanking on the actor's name, and also the girl captain as well. I think they both do a fantastic job in this roles. This is honestly probably the most stunning looking short trek. Like, compared to all the other short treks, like Q&A looks nice, Calypso looks nice, but this one looks absolutely gorgeous, and the amount of work they put into the production design of The Trouble with Edward is phenomenal. And I do think there's also a lot of really good humor in this piece that has me excited for Lower Decks, because this was written by some of the team for Lower Decks. The Tribble, like, sucker-upper, that just had me laughing hysterically. And then during the meeting with H. John Benjamin, that's the actor's name, his sort of beats with the captain were absolutely hysterical. Like him saying, like, they taste like scallops. Or, like, I could make them brain dead if you wanted. And also, I really think that the Tribble cereal ad at the end after the credits is hysterical. I know some people are like, is this canon? But I just think it's a lot of fun, and just a fun thing to do in the Trek universe. The reason that this short trek doesn't hit higher for me, and I do think it would have hit higher had it not been for this, is just a little tweak in sort of the mean-spiritedness of this short trek. And basically that comes down from the captain character. The captain character throughout the entire short trek seems to be very belittling of H. John Benjamin's character. Like during the meeting scene, she kind of insults him, she hates on him, she kind of belittles his ideas and sort of ignores him. And then later on, when she calls him into her office, she basically says, oh, I've transferred you. You've complained about me and I've transferred you off the ship just immediately. And I would have really liked it. It would have felt more in the vein of like Star Trek, like trying to meet someone halfway, trying to do better and trying to learn and grow. If she had just been someone who just like was trying to reach out to H. John Benjamin's character, was like, hey, look, I saw you complain about me. Maybe we can work something out. Let's talk this out. Like, what's your problem with me? And maybe we can try and do better. But the fact that she's just kind of mean-spirited about it and just calls him like names at certain points just doesn't feel like very Star Trek-y and like a good captain to me. And I know she's a new captain, so I get that. But I wish we had like seen her like learn from that a little bit. And I'm okay with H. John Benjamin being a jerk Starfleet officer. I mean, there's going to be jerks in any organization, even in the evolved future of the Federation, and that's kind of where you're drawing your humor from. So I'm fine with H. John Benjamin just being a jerk, but I wish she had just come from it from a point of like, oh, let's try and work this out, and then H. John Benjamin being like, nope, you're stupid, I hate you, and then she's like, okay, well, I guess you have to go. But the fact that she sort of starts from a place of like, all right, this guy's annoying and silly and dumb, just kind of throws it off for me and kind of makes the whole short trek feel a little bit mean-spirited, and that kind of brings it down in my opinion. So if it had just made that one tweak, this short trek would have been elevated for me. Next on the list is Ephraim and Dot. This one I know a lot of people had problems with, especially like with canon and a few mistakes like the Enterprise A being in there when it really should just be the Enterprise, and also the fact that there are now sentient robots on the Enterprise, which kind of feels a little bit more Star Wars-y than Star Trek. But I can kind of look past that if I just sort of be like, this is the thing for kids. And yeah, it's canon, but we can kind of like say that it's like eased canon, or you could like say it's like all in the head of that like TV show that happens at the beginning of the short trek. It really doesn't matter for me all that much in the end, the canon arguments. I just thought this was a very cute, fun short trek. I don't have any kids, but I feel like, you know, if I wanted to show my children or, you know, my family's kids, like my cousins and things like that, this would be the short trek I would show them, and they'd probably have a lot of fun with it. I think the only thing that I really don't like for that angle is that there's a lot of references to past Star Trek stuff, especially that sequence where the tardigrade's chasing the Enterprise through all these like different moments in Enterprise history. And all of that really feels like, oh, you only enjoy that part if you know the references. And I don't really like just references for references' sake. I don't mind there being references to stuff if it either, one, doesn't detract from the plot. Like, I don't mind there being like a, look, here's a cool cameo that, you know, if you know this person, you know this character, you're going to enjoy it more. You'll get a little bit more out of it, but it won't detract from anyone else. Or if it like actually feeds into the actual storyline going on. Even people who may not know about the past stuff will have to read up a little bit, but as long as it feeds into the story in an interesting way, I'm fine with all that. But when it's so directly tied into the plot and doesn't really add anything, but it's just like, here's this reference, don't really love that. And so I felt like that kind of got a little bit egregious during the short trek. But beyond that, I just thought, you know, Ephraim was really, really cute. The antagonistic relationship with Dot was really enjoyable. I got really emotional at the end when we thought that Ephraim's eggs had been destroyed and that Dot kind of saved them at the end. I really just, it worked for me. I thought it was very cute. There's some issues I have with it I just outlined, but overall I thought this was just a very cute short trek and very enjoyable, and honestly makes me kind of excited for the Nickelodeon animated show, because I don't know, I'm just excited to see that Star Trek branching out to get more younger audiences, because, you know, the problem with Star Trek nowadays is kind of aging older, and we need to bring in younger audiences into Trek, and finding a good gateway for them that's not just like parents showing them like Discovery or Picard or things like that, that there's a gateway for them to find it on their own without someone else giving it to them. I think that's great. So Ephraim and Dot does a great job at sort of beginning that piece for the Star Trek franchise. All right, next up, The Brightest Star. The Brightest Star kind of falls into a very similar trap that Runaway did, in that it's very much a prequel to Discovery Season 2, and really feels like it's feeding more into that than kind of being its own thing. But this one works a little bit more for me because it just feels like a good backstory for Saru that kind of feels like it fully encompasses the entire story that it needed to tell within itself. I didn't feel like I needed more to this short trek after this like I did with Runaway, where I felt like after Runaway, I kind of felt that there was going to be some plot threads there that were going to be picked up, and it kind of didn't really weave itself super naturally into Season 2 of Discovery. This one felt like it was a whole story in its own, and then when it comes back up in Discovery, it doesn't feel like you needed to have seen this, and it also felt like much more naturally fed into the story of Season 2 of Discovery, as opposed to just kind of like, hey, Poe's gonna show up. It's like, oh, Saru's planet is a place that, is necessary for the plot. Well, it does retcon a little bit of stuff with Saru, because we kind of, in Season 1 of Star Trek Discovery, it kind of felt like he was more of an actively hunted species instead of like a culled species. I really liked this idea of Saru just not feeling like this is what he wants out of his life. And this idea of like, oh, I want to seek out and go to the stars. It felt very, very Star Trek-y, like, oh, kind of wanting to push beyond what the world is telling you and trying to dream and hope and look for more out there in the universe. And that just felt very heartwarming. It felt very Trek in its message. And I just really enjoyed this look at Saru's backstory. And Doug Jones just always does a phenomenal job as Saru, and really in any acting role that he has, that I just enjoy watching him get to flesh out this character a little bit more and give us a little bit more of a more... Saru in Season 1 of Discovery was much more of a fear-based Saru. And Season 2 of Discovery, Saru became much more confident in himself. And coming back all the way here, you just see a Saru who's much less confident in himself, but much more like downtrodden, kind of like, all right, yeah, I'm gonna just do my life. But you kind of see what makes him a little bit different from the Kelpians around him, and what made him unique, and what makes him deserving of being the first Kelpian Starfleet officer. It really just clicked on all those levels for me, and it really just ended up being a beautiful story. And the fact that we got a little chance to see more of Prime Georgiou at the end of this short trek was nice, because as much as I like Mirror Georgiou, Emperor Georgiou, or Empress Georgiou, I really feel like we deserved more time with Georgiou from the Prime timeline, because she just seemed like a really awesome captain, and it was just sad that we disposed of her so quickly. All right, next up is The Escape Artist. This one, I think, worked much better than The Trouble with Edward, because it's not less mean-spirited. It definitely has a lot of like sort of darker tinged, more mean-spirited humor, but it works much better with the character of Harry Mudd, who is someone not part of Starfleet, who is inherently a character who is kind of a jerk throughout all of Star Trek. And the humor here worked really, really well. It felt very funny, it felt very natural to the situation, and kind of like poked fun at many different corners of the Trek universe, and actually like fleshed things out. We got to see a little bit more of the Orions, we got to see a little bit more of the, the Tellarites, and learn a little bit more about their society, and just get some good humor out of it as well. And I just loved the cross-cutting between all the different versions of Harry Mudd, and seeing like him constantly trying to talk himself out of situations. And you're watching all of them, you're thinking like, how did he always get out of all these situations? But I really loved at the end that the twist is that all the Harry Mudds are actually just androids, and it kind of like recontextualizes the entire short trek of like, oh, he doesn't really talk himself out of all these things. Because the Harry Mudd we saw in the original series is not someone, you know, every time he tried to talk himself out of something, he just really got his shoe deeper in the mud, to use a really weird metaphor. And he never was able to be the swift talker that he always proclaimed to be. And so I kind of like that this continued that fact and showed that, no, he's not going to be able to talk himself out of the situation, but he knows that and he plays it up. And sort of gets us to see Harry Mudd win for once. Which, you know, as much as I don't love Harry Mudd as a person, I kind of enjoy watching his character, so it's kind of nice to see him have a win at the end here. And again, I think this humor works much better than The Trouble with Edward, because it doesn't, like, feel like it's coming from a place that doesn't really fit in the Star Trek universe thematically. Next up on my list is Children of Mars, the last short trek that we got and the prelude to Star Trek Picard. I know some people have a lot of problems with this one for various reasons that range from like silly, in my opinion, like the fact that they had 23rd century ships in the shipyard at Utopia Planitia. That's whatever to me. If that bothers you, that's fine, but for me, I'm just like, whatever. To like other things with like, the fact that they would put the 9/11 imagery right up on the screen for all the students to see, possibly traumatizing them. That one reads a little bit more real to me. But honestly, this short trek really, really hit me hard. I mean, number one, I was someone who was bullied in school. I was, a fat 300-pound, at the time I was like 200-pound kid. I was nerdy, I was like a band geek, and I got bullied and beat up a few times throughout my elementary and middle school life. Got a little bit better in high school. So that sort of like bullying stuff like really hit me hard in this, and emotionally just resonated with me because it felt so real. And then also the ending, which had this 9/11 imagery that just brought me back to being a kid in 6th grade who, I was there in school when 9/11 happened, and just feeling the fear from all my teachers around me and not really understanding or knowing what was going on, but knowing something really horrific had happened. I just remember that very clearly. And this short trek just reminded me of that in a very powerful, distinct way that didn't feel egregious, but felt like it was trying to be respectful of that moment, but also using it to say something about like how in those moments, even in the darkest of moments where we lose something in our grief, we can reach out and find some positivity, that we can find each other. Like even our most hardened enemies can be someone who can help us, can support us, even in the darkest of times. And Star Trek has always been about finding connection with others, finding new species, new civilizations. And sometimes, we see that as a very bright, beautiful thing, but Children of Mars reminds me that sometimes we find others through grief. And that's not always the best way to find someone, but we can still find connection that way. And it's just as important to talk about finding connection through pain and hardship and grief as it is to talk about finding connection through love and caring and kindness and seeking out these new lives. And so I just really felt like this was a unique twist on the Star Trek message that just really, really worked for me. And I do think that there are some problems that are in this one, but for me, it just really just hit me hard right in the feels. And I want to commend this short trek for that. All right, my second to last pick for the best short treks is Q&A. I really, really enjoyed Q&A. I thought it was a really brilliant look at the character of Spock when he was younger, and also gave us finally a little bit more of a look into the character of Number One, who, we hadn't really seen too much of her character in The Cage. We got little hints of it throughout Discovery Season 2, like with her eating French fries and burgers. But this was the first chance to really flesh out her character in an interesting way and kind of see how she differentiated herself from Spock. Because in The Cage, we see a lot of what Spock would become later on down the road in the character of Number One. So it's kind of cool to see and kind of make the connection that Number One kind of taught Spock how to hide his emotions, to hold on to his emotions, to learn to become a little bit more less emotional, and that kind of leading Spock into becoming the Spock that we know and love, and also help him deal with his sort of emotional issues as at that time in his life and career. And it also answers the question of why did Spock seem more emotional in The Cage and in earlier episodes of the original series? It's because he was still learning and still trying to grow and emulate Number One. And we got a little bit more of that evolved in Star Trek Discovery Season 2, so it was nice to see a Spock even before Star Trek Discovery Season 2 and learn a lot more about him that way. Seeing a Spock who was much more unsure of himself as an ensign and in his sort of ability to balance emotion and logic, and being much more on the emotional side than the logic side that he would eventually lean into later in his career, and then even further in his career finding a balance between the two. So I really just kind of enjoyed seeing that different version of Spock. And it's always wonderful, like everyone talks about Anson Mount, but personally, as much as I love Anson Mount and love Pike and want a Pike series, I adore Ethan Peck's Spock. I think he did a fantastic job, and no hatred towards Zachary Quinto. I do like his take on Spock, but I think that Ethan Peck really knocks it out of the park. I mean, no one's going to ever reach Leonard Nimoy's level of Spock. I mean, that's just a given. I don't think anyone expects to. But I think Ethan Peck just gives his own take on this character in such a unique and fun and really thoughtful way that every time I see him on screen, I just absolutely enjoy him. So just seeing Q&A was a true treat for me, and I just absolutely adored it. All right, and my final and favorite short trek so far is Calypso. I think Calypso might be one of the most beautiful things that Star Trek has ever produced. It's not my favorite thing that Star Trek has ever produced. I think I've seen other things in Star Trek that I really enjoy more, but Calypso just, for me, was such a beautiful, beautiful piece that just talked about our ability to find connection and emotion with each other, and what sort of prevents us from really feeling fulfilled in certain ways, and the way that this episode was shot, the way it sort of developed these characters, and made me really care about these characters who I had never seen before. Like, I'd never seen Craft before, and I'd never seen the sentient version of Discovery as well, and it made me care about both of them and really invest in their love story in what, 10 minutes? 10 minute time? And it just truly felt like a really unique thing that you couldn't have told any other way. Like all of the other short treks outside of maybe like Children of Mars and a couple of ones, I feel like we could have gotten those stories within a larger Trek episode, but Calypso really feels like it had the perfect amount of time to tell the story that it wanted to tell. It didn't need more, it didn't need less. You just needed this 15 minutes to tell this really beautiful story. And it left some intriguing plot threads that I hope will get picked up in Season 3 of Discovery, like, why was the Discovery abandoned for 1,000 years? What's going on with the Federation? What's that war that Craft was involved in? These are intriguing questions that, asked me more about the world of Star Trek, and I really loved that. But it never really felt like it took away from the story being told, this very insular story. And that's a hard, hard line to walk, to be able to branch out and expand the world, but never really losing sight of the story that you're trying to tell. And I think this short trek just really balances that so beautifully. And it's really telling that both my favorite short treks, Q&A and Calypso, were both written by Michael Chabon, who's writing Star Trek Picard, which is why I'm very excited for at least the first season of Star Trek Picard, because he's just going to be involved in those, and his short treks have been easily my favorite short treks overall. So yeah, that's my list of favorite short treks, but do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What's your list of short treks and your rankings of them? And if you want to see more videos on Star Trek, all my reviews on Star Trek Picard, some video essays on Star Trek, and how politics and social issues are weaved into the fabric of geek culture, that's what my channel is all about. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel to not miss any of that. And if you want to help make these videos even better, you can help me out on my Patreon page. I also set up a PayPal link if you would just rather just give a one-time donation, but really every little bit helps me pay the bills. I'm also getting surgery this year, which is going to be a bit of a financial burden, so any financial help really means a lot to me in this time in this year, so I'd greatly appreciate if you can support me there. But regardless of if you subscribe or if you get to my Patreon, it really meant a lot to me that you joined me on this video. So as always, I hope that you live long and prosper. And special thanks to my commander level and above Patreons, Stefan Schuhart, Michael McGee, Boyd Earl, Lal Lindley, Wellington Marcus, Munir Amlani, BBD, and Mari Nekar.